Hello, welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Dana Corrigan and I am working on an original animated project, Fate Saga. I also work as a 2D animation instructor and teach production and pre-production classes. I've been working on Fate Saga for a long time and figured at this stage now is a great time to start showing the process and use this as an educational opportunity for young animators who are interested in creating your own animation projects. This video was recorded from my Twitch stream, sped up by about 15 times quicker than it was in the original video. Now, not including the first two poses drawn prior to this video and the last adjustments in flat colors that were done after the video, the whole process of creating Larkspur's turnarounds took about, I would say, I think 6 hours. Here I'm working on what are called turnarounds for Fate Saga's main character, Larkspur. So what are turnarounds? Turnarounds are part of the animation pre-production process where you draw your character in multiple angles so that animators have a visual reference for what the character should look like. Now, I've done model sheet turnarounds for Larkspur years ago, prior to the start of the project, but her design's updated since then, and the original turnarounds are not really entirely on model anymore. Wasn't really a big deal at the time because I'm the only animator currently working on this project. So as long as I knew what she's supposed to look like and I could use the other shots as reference, it really wasn't too big a deal. It's kind of more important that you have other animators who would be able to draw the character consistently, because the idea of an animation production is to make it look like it was one artist who did the whole thing. And so far in animation, since I am the only artist, it has, by technicality, that hasn't been an issue. Stylistic consistency anyway with the characters. However, I'm currently working on an experimental process of creating what's called a 360 2D rig. So what that is it's a 2D puppet that can behave and have the flexibility akin to a 3D puppet. It mostly consists of moving parts and deforming lines and shapes to give the implication of what we call 2.5D. 2.5D just means making a 2D object look like it's moving in 3D. And this can help make the production process quicker. Now, I have been working with puppets on some shots, depending on the needs of the shots, and creating more basic rigs when the shots call for it, and otherwise just using frame-by-frame animation. However, that becomes an extremely time-taxing process, and especially me being the only animator, and the current time frame of the project is about 16 minutes, it makes the project a little bit hard to finish in a timely manner. So creating a 360 rig for the main characters would help speed up the production process, and something I'm very excited about. But I actually haven't created a 360 2D puppet before, so this whole process will be a little experimental. But what we need to start with is turnarounds that are a little bit closer to what we would see in a 3D character turnarounds for what would be a 3D model. In 3D, we would use what's called T-pose, or usually T-pose. At least those are the ones that I've worked with in 3D. And that's when the character's arms are out like a T. For 2D, we want a little bit more of a natural pose. Although, I don't know if her pose looks particularly natural, but when the arms are a bit further down. Because when you raise the arms up like a T-pose, that affects your clavicle and affects your shoulders, bringing it up into a shoulder position that we wouldn't typically have if our arms weren't up so high. So that's one of the reasons why we want the arms to be a little bit further down in this case. Now, in general frame-by-frame animation, usually you'd see turnarounds that contain more of the character's personality, maybe an action pose or one that generally shows their attitude. Though we would need to make sure that the pose didn't encroach on the visibility of the character's design or their height. For example, we wouldn't have them crouching, kneeling, or laying on the floor in a typical turnaround. Still, they would have some kind of gesture. Sometimes during a regular 2D animation turnarounds, they may not be in the exact same gesture for all of the angles, and sometimes they are. I've seen it both ways. Again, though, for a 360 puppet, we need what's a little bit closer to a T-pose, or a very a static kind of pose with the arms a little bit apart from the body so that we get a good view of the body in all of the angles. So where do we get started? I usually recommend starting with the front or 3/4 front view of your character, just because those tend to be the most comfortable positions to draw a character. Most likely, if you've drawn your character a lot, those are probably the angles you predominantly use. But the important thing is it's just a pose that or an angle that you're comfortable with drawing the character and that you feel some confidence that you'd be able to get them to be on model. So by on model, I mean they feel right to you in this case. Once you have the model sheets, then on model means it looks like they're drawn in the same style and the same details as the model sheet. So once you have the first pose drawn, you use that particular pose as a reference for your other poses. Again, the idea is to make sure that it looks like the same character with the same details, with the similar shapes, and of course drawn by the same artist. Make sure that your character looks as on model and correct as you make it, and as you keep going, you may find that a detail that looks good in one angle doesn't quite work for another. So you may have to go back and forth. I've had to do that, and I do it a little bit here in this video. So now, as you move forward, it can be really helpful to have those previous drawings and use the others as you draw the others. So one thing that's really nice about drawing digitally is you have the advantage of moving the drawings on top of each other, so you can trace or measure them more easily. Then when you're done, you can just move them apart. When working with traditional media, that's a little harder. Usually you'd have to measure with rulers, and then I usually measured from the top and bottom of the paper, see how many centimeters it is or millimeters, and then measure the head height and move across and that kind of thing, usually using light colored pencils. But digitally, you don't have to worry about that as much, which is nice. So something to consider as well when figuring out your character's model sheets is something I just mentioned briefly, and that's called your character's head height. So in real world measurements, I picture Larkspur to be roughly 5'10" to 6 feet tall. Larkspur is rather tall and kind of a willowy young woman, but in cartoons, real world measurements don't really help us as much. It's sometimes better to compare the characters' heights to each other and to measure their proportions using their own body. Larkspur is about 6 heads tall. An adult human in the real world with an average height is about 7.5 heads tall. So Larkspur's head's a little larger than a typical adult, but that's not uncommon in cartoons. Their head height can also be a way to measure where other parts of their body land. For example, her cowl is about 1 head tall. Also something to consider is you want to measure it by the height of their skull, not including their hair, or any hair that comes off from the top of their head. What I mean by that is if you were to take a character like, let's say, Marge Simpson, you'd have an inaccurate head height if you used her tall hair as part of her head height, and it would make things more unreliable if any situations came up that changed her hair, such as if she had it in a different style for one episode, or had a scene where her hair got wet and was weighed down. Once you're happy with your first drawing and you start your second, keep checking and comparing the two to make sure that the details transfer well and that the character looks good in both angles. There's nothing wrong with going back and making changes to any pose of your character's turnarounds. Now, a little trick I'd recommend also is whenever you finish a draft of your character, try to flip it. In digital media, there's usually a command that lets you flip the drawing, or the whole canvas. Or if you're working with traditional media, you can hold it up against a light or window and draw on another sheet of paper back to back, or on the back of the paper you're currently using. This is a quick way to see if anything's wrong with your original drawing, because once you flip it, mistakes stand out more prominently. I remember finding that I discovered that ability or that approach when I was in grad school. I was taking a comic drawing class and they brought up that trick, and it was so cool and so interesting because I never really thought about it until that came up. And then when I'd flip, you'd find like if the eyes aren't aligned or if anything's a little bit off, it just seems to stand out more once you flip it. I find it very helpful. Another trick is, and this is a bit easier to pull off if you're working digitally, is once you're done with the front view and side view, the front view and the 3/4 view, you can use their silhouettes to help you draw the back view and the 3/4 back view. I totally do this while putting together Larkspur's turnarounds. Work smarter, not harder. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. If you have any further insight into model sheet turnarounds, or would like to see me cover any topics like this in more depth in the future, please let me know in the comments. If you're enjoying Fate Saga, or find the supplementary material to be helpful or informative, please feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.